Hi everyone, thanks for watching this video. So I've seen on the Facebook pages for some of the sim racers and on some of the forums, a lot of people new to sim racing asking about car setups. And it's obviously something that's of interest to not only sim racers but real racers as well. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to use this sim that I'm in the process of building for one of the top British touring car teams to demonstrate a couple of the fundamentals of race car tuning, go through a few of the basic terminology and demonstrate understeer and oversteer. Try and give you a bit of an insight on how to go about tuning a car. Just give you a bit of background on my credentials. So I run GP Simulation, and the idea of the company is that we do professional motorsport training for drivers, but also vehicle dynamics simulation for teams. We work quite closely with a number of teams, and this rig here is going to be going to one of the top British touring car teams in a bid. I've been working with them for a couple of years, but we're going to have a big push and take it all in-house this year, and try and secure some titles this year with any luck. But prior to that, I spent about 10 years in Formula One as a design engineer, particularly on suspension and brake and crash structures, things like that, with a number of teams. And prior to that, I was a suspension designer for a shock absorber manufacturing company that provided shock absorbers to like super touring car teams and F1, World Rally, and Le Mans type sports cars. I've been involved in racing all my life as a race engineer, and so hopefully in the next series of videos that I do, I can take you through some of the principles of tuning cars, try and give you some generalised information so that you can have a stab yourself. Sim's a great way of testing things and learning, and because you can't go wrong. It's not going to be an expensive error if you get it wrong. Students of like race car vehicle dynamics, you would definitely find it very interesting to use a sim to have a play with this kind of stuff and feel it for yourself. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe to the channel, because this is going to just be the first in a series of videos on this topic. One other thing that I did want to say in this introduction about this rig is that because it's going to a professional motorsport team, it's got a very high torque direct drive steering motor on it. The principles behind what I'm going to describe you'll feel in a real car and on a direct drive wheel. Whether or not you'll get the same sort of fidelity and feel on a cheaper home-based rig, I don't really know, because I don't really have that much experience with them. I did have a Logitech steering wheel when I was first developing the sim, just while I waited for the direct drive motor to turn up, and the force feedback was so weak and of low fidelity that I'm not really sure whether or not what I'm going to demonstrate here is necessarily going to be detected on those sort of setups. But still, the principles will apply, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you will get a similar sort of feeling in those setups. But I thought I'd just point that out in case that when you're at home trying this, you don't get the same sort of results that I'm talking about and the things that I'm feeling. Okay, so the first thing I want to describe is the feeling of understeer when you get in the steering wheel. Now, understeer is you steer into a corner at an amount that you think is going to take you around the corner, but you actually end up steering less, if you like. It's kind of like as the word says, you understeer. But in the steering wheel, what you feel is, like here where it's steering perfectly well, I can feel the load from the tyres consistently in the steering wheel. The more I turn, the faster I go, the more load I feel in the steering wheel. When I start to get understeer, I turn in and then the steering seems to go not exactly light, but the amount of load that builds up in the steering reaches a peak. And it's at that peak that the car then won't turn anymore. Like now, look. The steering's actually quite light. And I'm not steering. So that's understeer. Now I think the way this Porsche is set up at the moment, it's going to be very difficult to induce oversteer. But oversteer is the reverse. So there's understeer again, lots of lock, it's not turning, and the load in the steering's goes light, feels a lot lighter. And we just miss all the apexes. To be fair, I'm driving this in order to generate understeer. I could drive slower and more and get it to behave better, but I'm trying to demonstrate the understeer. Right, so oversteer is the next one. Now, oversteer is where you turn in and the back goes around. You steer more than you expect. Now you get a very different feeling in the steering wheel with oversteer because the load's still there, but visibly you're turning more than you feel. So you're constantly coming off the lock. And we try and do it again. See? And you're wanting to try and catch the slide. I'll try and use paddock Druids again to demonstrate, because this nice slow speed corner I can put lots of power down, lots of lock. So lots of lock, lots of power, and the back just goes round. So that's oversteer. What you're looking for from a setup is a car that turns in well, no oversteer, no understeer, but that's probably got slightly progressive understeer on the corner exit. That's a lot more controllable than sort of snap oversteer. Because with snap oversteer you have no option but to back out the throttle and lose time. And around we go. Okay. So I'll stop all of that messing around and describe some of the tuning or things that we've got available to us to tune that, help tune that out. Okay, so let's look through this page here, because with R-Factor 2 you've got lots of options, and you can run formula cars that have third spring elements and dampers. You've got this piece at the top of the page here that can be used when you've got a formula car. Obviously in the Porsche you've just got a spring and damper at each corner. So you've got front spring rate, left and right. Now here's a few terms that I want to just explain, because there's some common misconceptions about dampers and what these terms mean. Slow bump means slow speed bump. Now mostly on dampers you've got 2 or 3 adjusters. If you've got 2 adjusters on the damper, you'll probably be adjusting slow speed rebound and slow speed bump. If you've got 3 adjusters, or maybe 4 adjusters, you'll have, well, on 3 adjusters you'll have slow speed bump, slow speed rebound and high speed bump. And on 4 adjusters you'll have slow speed rebound, slow speed bump, high speed bump and high speed rebound. Now, a lot of people think that speed in this in damper terminology means car speed, but it doesn't. It's the speed that the damper shaft is moving, i.e. how fast the piston is going through the oil in the damper. And most of your transient behaviour, i.e. your turn in and your power on feel to the car, is set in the slow speed regions. So your adjusters here, slow bump and slow rebound, will be the ones that you'll feel the most benefit from in terms of tuning, how the car feels when it turns in, how it feels when you put the power down. High speed, high shaft speeds, so high speed bump and high speed rebound, fast bump and fast rebound in R-Factor 2 terminology here. It's really how the car reacts when you're hit curbs and things like that. So that's just explain that terminology. So just remember, it's how fast the damper piston is moving, not how fast the car is going. Packers here are actually, don't know that you can, in R-Factor 2 you can define bump rubbers, and the packers are basically spacers that determine at what point in the damper's travel that bump rubber picks up. Bump rubber tuning on real cars is quite crucial, especially cars with high aerodynamic loads. That's basically, you can think of it as a second spring rate. So if you've got current spring rate of 260 newtons per millimetre, you've got zero packers at the minute. If you put a packer in that picked up the bump rubber, you can increase that spring rate somewhat and stiffen it up. Ride height is obviously the distance between the bottom of the car and the ground, and that can make a big difference in terms of centre of gravity height and aerodynamic effects, drag and stuff. And obviously on this here you've got exactly the same thing for the rear suspension, and down here you've got a front and rear anti-roll bar. You've got your toe in and toe out setting. So if we just stick with this page for a moment and just go back to discussing understeer and oversteer, there's a couple of little general rules that you can use, that you can apply, and then you can have a little feel for it when you're racing yourself and get a feel for it. But essentially, you can view understeer as being, you can view understeer as being the front of the car suspension being too stiff. So if you want to cure understeer, you either soften the front suspension or you stiffen the rear suspension. So basically the corner that gives up first will be the proportionately stiffer end of the car. I say proportionately stiffer because you've got 2 ways to go. So like in an understeer situation, you can soften the front spring to try and cure it, or you can stiffen the rear spring to get the balance back. Okay, so, and conversely, oversteer might be cured by softening the rear suspension or stiffening the front suspension. That's a very broad general rule of thumb, and it works to a degree. Now, to take it further, you need to start breaking the corner down into the various phases of it, and start considering what load is in the suspension and where that load comes from, so that you can figure out whether or not, or which element of the suspension might give you the best way of addressing the problem. So for example, if I've got an understeer at Paddock Hill Bend there, where I'm going at a fairly constant pace, the car's quite well settled, in the mid corner, because the dampers aren't moving, there's no load being contributed to the suspension from the dampers. So there's no point in me adjusting the dampers. It's very unlikely that I'm going to get any benefit from that. But what I have got is I've got the car turned in, it's rolled over, it's wound up its anti-roll bars, and it's compressed its outer spring and decompressed its inner spring. So anti-roll bar spring rate and front suspension main spring rate, both likely to give me a positive effect on tuning the handling at that point. However, if my understeer is on turning into the corner, where the car is starting to roll over, the springs haven't taken much of a set yet, the anti-roll bar hasn't yet wound up very much, and the piston on the dampers is moving through the oil as the car's rolling over, now we've got a situation where a large proportion of the load that's in the suspension is coming from the dampers, and so at that point the slow speed bump and slow speed rebound settings on the damper are likely to have an effect on the car. So try and bear that in mind, that you've got to think what the car's doing at the point that you've got the problem. I'm not going to go into aerodynamics at the moment because that's going to confuse things. This is supposed to be a broad general terminology for beginners. So I'd suggest now that you have a little play with that, and I might just have a quick run round with a softer front spring on this Porsche and just see what the difference is and how it feels. Okay, so the car now definitely steering better, definitely less understeer, definitely feel the effect of using the throttle to bring the rear of the car around. I can hit the apexes easier. Car's a little slower to react, a little slower to turn in. Whoa, missed the apex. But there's other things that I would now try, I think, with this. Having had this make a positive effect, I might make the front anti-roll bar a bit stiffer and the rear springs a little bit stiffer to try and give me that turn-in response back, and without any detriment to the bringing the understeer back. But have a play, whoa, and see what you think. I hope you've enjoyed watching the video. Hope you learned something. Like and subscribe to the channel, and you'll get notifications when I do the next installment, where I maybe talk about some other characteristics and things that are available to tune them in sim games, things like brake balance and aero loads. But for now, I think we'll call that it. Cheers.